All righty. Let's get going here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSM Mastermind. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our monthly live webcast today, discussing nailing the handoff between sales and customer success, what I expect to be a very lively discussion. This free learning event is being hosted by Success Coaching, the team that brought you the first accredited customer success professional development training program. We are now running our popular instructor-led CCSM Level 1 and Level 2 certification programs virtually and monthly. I also wanted to invite my partner, Aaron Thompson, to talk about a new program we've launched that we're particularly excited about. Aaron, why don't you tell everybody what we're doing?
Well, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for letting me crash the party for a minute. So it's perfectly in line with what this webinar is going to be about, nailing the handoff between sales and CS. We see that as a struggle, and I can't wait to hear from our panelists today. But because of that, we've generated an entire workshop. It's just 2 half-day sessions, and it's called Outcome-Based Selling. And the idea here is, how do you align the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel to the customer's desired outcome? And if you are a trusted advisor, how can you grow accounts without being salesy? So we take the group through and give you a framework for how to do that. It's coming up on August 17 and 18, so we've got about a month left. Intentionally small class size, so there's a limited number of seats. So I'd advise anybody interested, I think Ashley's going to put the link in chat. Go ahead and get signed up as soon as possible, and I will see you in about a month. Thanks, Andrew.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. So once again, find out more about OBS and our other training and coaching offerings at successcoaching.co. As Aaron mentioned, Ashley did go ahead and put that in the chat window with a link to that. So for those of you who haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success. Regardless of the company you work for, the details of your customer-facing role, or the size of the customers that you deal with, we try and pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule for our upcoming CSM Mastermind events and our public training courses can be found, once again, at successcoaching.co under the events calendar tab, so please check that out. We will also post a replay of this webinar along with a transcription on our website by next Tuesday. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice and tips and techniques, shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing customer success on a daily basis. In order to do that, we invite 3 participants from the customer success community to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people that have been recommended to us as being great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and their perspectives. We will be taking questions later during the webcast, so please use that Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. I'm very excited to welcome our panel for today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Let's get started with Angela. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Angela Hedinger. I am a senior CSM at Box. Been with Box for just over 14 months, or just about 14 months, and have a bit of experience with customer success in both startup environment and larger corporate environment and more established corporate environment, and really excited to share the time here with Mike and Michael.
Thanks, Angela. Thank you for making time for us today. Michael, you're up.
Hey guys, I'm Michael Bucchilato. I'm an enterprise customer success manager at LawGeeks. And I've been in customer success for just over 5 years. And similarly to Angela, I've been both in the more corporate environment as well, now in a startup environment. So excited to chat with you guys and talk a bit about the CS to sales handoff, or vice versa.
Thanks, Michael. And last but not least, of course, Mike.
We'll talk about the CS to sales and sales to CS, right? Make sure it goes both ways.
Goes both ways, exactly.
Exactly. I'm Mike. I work over at a company called Hubspot in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've been in customer success for just about 3 years. I'm currently leading a team over there. Beyond excited to talk to this group about sales and customer success alignment, and just all the fun topics, all the experiences that we've all shared over the last couple of years. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Once again, thanks everybody for your time today. And thanks for that great discussion we started having on Friday. Like I said, I think it's going to be a good discussion today. So let's get to the topic for today. Moments of truth are points in the customer journey where we can make or break our relationship with a customer. One of the first moments of truth is during that sales to post-sales handoff. This new customer is being handed over from the team that made all the promises of value to a new team of individuals who are now responsible for making those promises a reality. So it's incredibly important that transition is a smooth one. I've worked with tiny startups that absolutely nail that process, making them seem like a much larger, more mature, well-oiled operation. And I've worked with large Fortune 50 companies who absolutely fail at that process. And they establish this negative tone with their customers who leave that experience wondering if they made the right purchase decision. So once again, this is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle from a customer journey perspective. So to get us going, and I think I like to say that I've learned more from the failures in my career than the successes. Let's talk about some of the situations where you've seen this go wrong, and then let's talk about how do we make it work right. Who wants to get us started?
Yeah, happy to. Go ahead, Michael. Take us on.
So I think a lot of the drop off comes in being prepared. So sales reps coming into the handoff, not having all of the relevant information for you as a customer success professional, and then you having to go to the customer on the kickoff call and doing a lot of that discovery. And from the customer's perspective, there's some fatigue in terms of the buying process. Typically in an enterprise SaaS environment, they're talking to a sales rep anywhere between 3 and 6 months. They trust that from your organization, you guys have a unified front, and that kind of knowledge transfer is there. So having to redo that discovery is painful for them, and really gets you off to on the wrong foot with the customer, from my perspective.
And sometimes that discovery is, you do need to do some additional discovery to dig into things, to peel back the onion. But the worst thing that you can do is be answering the same questions or asking the same questions that the customer's already answered.
For
and
sure.
I think, I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it's always important to reconfirm what you've heard from what went on in the pre-sales process. But, having all of that foundational information before going into it helps you set up those questions to reconfirm.
Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, and what I was going to add to that is thinking about it, I think that the value that an account team brings to the customer is our different perspectives and our different ways that we approach problems. And we all hear different things. Our brains are just tuned differently. So I think that, there does have to be a little bit of rediscovery, and we're going to get something out of it as CSMs, a little bit different than our sales counterparts are going to get, and that our solutions counterpart, engineering counterparts are going to get. And really, that's where I think that if done correctly, we can add the value. I know we're starting off with when it goes wrong. But to your point earlier, if we're asking the same questions, that's definitely going to not sit well with the customer, and they're really just going to get frustrated. They're excited. They just came off that high of signing the deal, and they want to get started. The last thing they want to do is talk to someone else, as nice as we might be, and have to repeat everything they just went through for the past 6, 9, 12, 18 months, whatever your sales cycle is.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on top of that too, I keep coming back to this word expectations, right? It goes wrong when the expectations aren't set for what exactly that customer can expect going forward, right? What does that timeline look like? Have my goals been shared with other folks across the org as well? Maybe the CS person needs to ask those questions again. If you set that expectation, that's going to totally change that customer experience, right? I think so much of us are focused on that customer experience. Poor expectations can really result in a negative experience overall.
Yeah, where I've seen it go wrong the most, those are the two. You brought up the two key things. Was the information wasn't transferred, right? So there's holes in the information and we don't know, that we might not necessarily know about. So we can go in blind, asking questions they've already answered, and then the expectations, whether they were purposely misset or it was just a just poorly communicated or what have you. And there's also expectation mismanagement in some cases where the customer's expectations are set based off of what they thought they heard. Maybe not, it wasn't necessarily the reality of the situation.
And poor expectation setting internally.
And poor
What does your AE expect from you? What do you expect from him or her? And the more you get to work with someone, depending on how your organization is structured, you might have one person that you work with very closely. You might have a couple people you work with very closely, and you can start to develop a rhythm, and they kind of know what to come with, what information to bring to you when they're making that handoff. And that's part of training as well. We're training our sales counterparts and our solutions engineering counterparts just as much as we're going to be working with and training our customers.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point. I mean, the way that you approach your internal relationship with sales should be very similar to the one that you approach it with your clients, and really understanding what their motives are, your salespeople, how they're compensated, what their communication style is, and really building a cadence around that. This way there is constant communication and you're getting that buy-in from them. This way, you don't get to a situation where they're not sharing all the relevant information and you're having to kind of go to the customer and start off in that kind of from a bad light, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, I think I was having this conversation with I did a level 2 boot camp last week, and we talked about how it's our responsibility, whether we like it or not. It's our responsibility to teach the sales team what it is we need, right? It's our responsibility to own that, because if we just expect them to know that, then we're not solving the problem. So let's kind of move into that problem solving mode and talk about, some of the things some of the process, some of the approaches that you all have used to, mitigate the risk of a breakdown in that transfer, really nailing the handoff.
I think approaching the relationship from a place of curiosity, I think even as you first join an organization, should be one of your top goals, is to sit down with sales folks, kind of learn what their day looks like, and start building rapport with them. This way, you can really get an understanding of who they are and how they work. I think something that's worked specifically well in the past is getting involved early on in the sales process. This way, they're not just throwing something over the fence to you once the deal closes. It's an opportunity to not only give the buyer perspective on how they're going to work with your team, but who it is they'll work with, what that looks like, and how you're going to be solving their problems. So I think the earlier you can get CS involved, puts you in a position to not only expedite the knowledge transfer, but really show the customer that you're all in and your team is all in. And shows you how you're going to set them up for success.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think a big part of it too is, how do your teams currently work together? What are your communication strategies? What's your source of truth for notes? Those types of things, right? There's so much that happens during a sales process that a CS team member might not be privy to, right? Who's actually involved in this? Who are the decision makers? Where can you find all that information easily to really get the insights into what's going on? So how is your team actually structured, and what are your communication streams? And are those as fine-tuned as possible so that they're always available?
Yeah, and I think one of Box's core values is to assume good intent. So I think that approaching a scenario where either you're working with an AE or you're still developing that rapport, and if something doesn't go right, as we were discussing earlier, just assuming good intent, and not that there was any deliberate misinformation or miscommunication or lack of information transfer. I think that approaching it that way kind of helps. At least it helps me just kind of like take a breath and say, okay, let me try and understand what's going on here. I've been brought into a lot of legacy accounts. So that really changes the dynamic as well, right? As opposed to everyone going in net new, the seller perhaps has a little bit more of the relationship because they've been through the sales cycle with the customer, but they're still kind of finding their footing there as well. When coming in with a legacy customer, that kind of changes what you can do. So you really have to go in and just demonstrate the value first to the AE, or else you're never going to be able to make those connections. So I think there's a little bit of a different approach depending on if it's a net new customer versus a legacy customer.
Well, I think you made a good point earlier about, that working with folks and kind of getting into a rhythm and really understanding them, how they work, and that building that relationship with sales is so important.
It really is. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us just as human beings, but this is not an existential conversation, so I'll keep it to this. But I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to try and understand another person's position. But I think in CS, just with the nature of our role and what we're doing, I think that if we can take a moment to kind of see because all the AEs have different styles. You have, somebody who's been selling for the past 25 or 30 years, and they have an approach and they're going to go with it. And they're either going to take you along for the ride or they're not. You may or may not be successful in changing the way they think. So how can you operate within that framework? You kind of have to figure that out for each AE. And I have a lot of newer CSMs that talk to me and they're like, well, how do you work with all of your AEs? And I said, there's no standard way that I work with any of my AEs. I mean, we have certain practices, I have certain things, certain expectations that I set for myself and that I set for the account team in general that we discuss and collaborate on. But I work differently with each one of my AEs, and that's where I feel like I'm most successful.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about, empathy at HubSpot, right? We should acknowledge sales is a challenging job for a lot of folks, right? It's a very unique job and they're doing the best that they can. So really building those relationships to know how they want to work is so important, nailing that handoff.
We talk about, once again, we talked about last week in my training class, how just like it's important to think like a customer when we're serving our customer, especially when it comes to sales, as well as just everybody else in the organization that you're working with internally, you need to try and take their perspective. You need to employ some of that empathy that those of us in customer success are blessed with, and understand their perspective and understand what's motivating them and how they're approaching things. And, embrace that, right? And adjust. They're different people. They're different personalities, right? So, and they're motivated and they're compensated differently than we are. And we need to take a step back and recognize that and embrace that and figure out how's the best way for us to work.
Because we need them to think differently than us, and we need them to,
yes,
be motivated differently than us, and that's what makes it work.
Yeah. 100% agree.
Seeking to understand before aiming to be understood. It's definitely a mantra. And I think, the earlier you can do that with sales folks, the better, right? You want to be able to break down those walls very early on. This way you're not seen as a blocker come later on.
Stephen Covey, 7 Habits. Seek first to understand. I love that.
I think it's true that Angela called out. We could get really existential here as well, because this exact thing could be applied to all your customer conversations as well. Having that empathy, having that understanding, it's going to make that handoff so much more successful when you understand both the sales rep and the customer's point of view as well. How do we really nail that? And partners, loved ones, and it can be as existential as we want to go here, folks, but these themes are across the board, I think.
Well, and this is what we do. This is what we do in this role. This is what we do for a living, right? So, I had one question last week where somebody said, well, how do we get them, how do we get them to do that? And I said, you need to make the first move, right? You need to be the one that goes to them and said, help me help you. Help me help you work better. I learned this early in my career. I'm not going to fight them. You got to do things my way. It's like, okay, how can we do things to help you be more successful?
Yeah. I think it's, trying to encompass a culture of collaboration just, to begin with. And I think some ways to do that is to set up lunch and learns with them, make them kind of feel the empathy for yourself as well, what you go through on a day-to-day and how you work with customers and what success looks like for customers. This way, as they approach new logo sales, they have that in the back of the mind of, what it takes to be a successful customer and how we actually work with customers to ensure that they're seeing value.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to have that strategic conversation. Don't be afraid to speak up and say, I think that we should do this. I think that we should do that. Or have you thought about it in this way? Because what that does is it's going to take you out of the administrative functions that often get relegated to CS when an AE hasn't worked with customer success before, hasn't worked thoughtfully with customer success before. So I tend to speak up a lot So far it's worked for me. I'm sure it hasn't worked in some scenarios, but so far it's been good, and I haven't received too many complaints that I'm aware of. So
as far as you know,
as far as I know, exactly. No news is good news type of scenario.
There's probably some hidden Slack channels.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And my husband might be on it too. They all probably commiserate. But really, because then what I found when I do that and taking an approach where I'm not trying to be an AE and I'm not trying to make any of my AEs, I think they're all extremely talented. I work with a really great pool. But I'm coming at it from a different perspective, and that's it. So just providing that different perspective to them and getting them thinking about it. And some AEs, it's not going to resonate because they have their goal and they're working towards that. But how can we operate within that framework? And I think we talked about in our prep session was, being the person behind the curtain, right? And in some scenarios, you have to be that person behind the curtain, but how do you make sure that you are effectively pulling those levers as you're behind the curtain?
Yeah, you have to be. Yeah, once again, you need to be the one that takes the lead. You need to be the one. You're going to need to be the one to explain to them. Here's how things work on our side of the fence. So how do we get this to mesh up with how things are working on your side of the fence? Because at the end of the day, even though there's a fence here, we're all on the same property, right? We're all after the same thing. These are our customers. They're the company's customers, and we need to work together effectively in order for the customer to have a good experience, have a good customer journey. So it's important that we're working well together, and that goes from not just educating them, but if somebody screwed up and missed set expectations, we need to be very careful about how we message that back to them and not do it in a way that is going to try and throw somebody under the bus or poke fun at them. We need to do it in a respectful way that re-educates, right? And it's not, and I talk to lots of younger, CSMs, people who are earlier in their career, and they get frustrated. I'm like, well, no, you don't get frustrated. You just need to educate. Well, they should. I'm like, no, don't. It's not a they should thing. You need to educate them and explain to them where the miss was, and do it in a respectful way.
Yeah. And we keep coming back to that idea of customer experience too, right? And I think most of our biggest fear is, who does the customer go to for what? And that's a big part of that relationship you have with sales as well too. You're talking about who actually owns what. After 6 months of working together on a sales process, now you're handed over to this customer success manager. Well, how does that relationship actually go with the customer success manager? What do you go to for them? All of that really, really matters from a customer perspective.
Well, and that needs to be really clear, because ideally your sales team in the sales process is explaining what customer success is and why you're here, what your role is. I was talking to somebody just earlier this week, and they said, I'm having this, I get handed over to the customer. Customer doesn't know what to do with, what they're going to do with us. So, well, is your sales team talking about customer success? No. Well, did you give them a slide or something to kind of lay things out? No. Well, do that, right? Give them, you've got to do that, help them help you.
I think that's a top, coming from the top thing, and I spoke about it briefly before, but I think as soon as you start talking about implementation in the pre-sales process, it's to your benefit to get someone from CS involved and start having those conversations, not only so they can kind of talk about what CS is, who they are, what they do, and why they do it. But again, to kind of cover all those points that we alluded to before, just making sure that there's no gaps in the information, and we're really setting the right expectations. So come close date, we're ready to rock.
And I 100% agree with you, but that's not always going to be reality, because there are going to be situations, depending on where your price point is, depending on how transactional your deals are, where you're not going to have that opportunity. You're not going to get engaged. It doesn't make sense for you to become engaged. So, as an alternative, what do you do? What do you do? If you can't get that, and once again, I 100% agree with you for especially for enterprise accounts, getting customer success involved in the sales cycle. But in lieu of that, if it doesn't make sense, what ideas, suggestions do you have for folks so that customer success gets enough information?
Well, One thing, it's a little bit easier depending on how your org is structured, right? If you're verticalized, for example, you can kind of have, and you have a vertical and then a ARR or TAV target, right? So you kind of know, hopefully leadership teams are meeting, right? And there's an interlock where everyone's discussing what's coming down the pipe and who the CSM might be. And then you could start following that customer on LinkedIn, social media, et cetera, really starting to understand that customer. And I recognize that that's a heavy ask because we're already trying to keep up with the customers that we have and all of the requests coming in and all of that. But if you can just kind of set up those LinkedIn notifications, if you have Sales Navigator, keep an eye on that, and stay engaged. You know, if you use Slack or Teams or whatever it is, if there is a channel for that customer, for that deal or for that customer, stay engaged with that and see if you can add value at any point in that conversation. So now you're adding value for the AE because it might not make sense to have you come in right away, to be honest, with a customer, right? If the AE has everything that they need and you have given them that slide about the points of differentiation, not only because of what a CSM can do, but the point of differentiation as an organization. Some organizations still haven't really bought into customer success for whatever reason. So that should be a selling point, is that we are here for you. I'm your beginning, right? And then I bring in this great team, and then we're going to help you do 1, 2, and 3. And having that discussion and finding ways you can insert yourself politely and thoughtfully and strategically.
Yeah. And you talk about org structure too, which is super important. There are plenty of orgs that have the pods, the verticals, different things like that to make sure these conversations are happening as well. I think it's important to call out incentives, right? Are your two teams judged on some kind of similar metric? Are they working together towards a common goal? Throw in a team like a support team or renewals or something like that. And you want to make sure everyone's working towards that same customer experience, which will ultimately create that alignment across the board. At least, hopefully it does. Now, I'm sure everyone has, stubborn AEs, right? Those types of things. It's all part of it. But like Michael said earlier, it starts at the top and works its way down. Those expectations have to be set. And you just really have to hope that folks are honoring them and holding them accountable when that time comes.
Google Alerts, by the way, is also another really great tool to keep track of what's happening in customer accounts. That I found very helpful if you don't have Sales Navigator.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think just showing initiative, Andrew, you emphasize it a lot. I think you showing the initiative with AEs to want to know more and to learn more. That's a good way for them to keep you in the loop, and you start to gather that type of information that's going to help, selfishly set you up for success, but also you start to kind of build that rapport and drive a cohesive partnership with them.
And I know this is not like I'm sorry, Andrew.
No, go ahead. Andrew.
I was just going to say, we're chatting here, but I don't feel like we've come up with like a manual, like here's a 1, 2, 3, you'll do this and everything's going to work smoothly, and everything's going to be perfect. And you always nail that handoff. And that's because it doesn't exist. And I don't think it's always going to work smoothly and you're always going to nail it. But I really think that continuing to do all of these things, and iterating on all of these little things, what that's going to do is that's going to build your personal brand as well within your organization. So now you're going to be brought in sooner in a sales cycle than perhaps you were when you first started at the organization, because now you've built this personal brand where your AEs know, hey, I really want to bring, Michael in because he adds a lot of value. So you have to also kind of be patient with yourself and with your AEs, like be patient with them, but also be patient with yourself and take a breath and recognize that if you keep doing it, it will happen. As long as, unless you get negative feedback that maybe something's not working, you definitely want to take that. But if you keep doing it and you keep, putting that in front of your AEs, you will get there.
And just talk about what that value is too, right? Like you're getting exposure to tons of industries, verticals, different things like that. You can speak to how somebody else did what that company wants to do in that sales process, right? You can talk to that at a very detailed, granular level because you've been a CSM for X number of years or months or whatever it may be, right? So that value you add is not just experience with working with sales, it's experience with working with customers in the product, in the tool, really driving that adoption and seeing results as well.
Yeah, I think it's the domain experience, I think, is really where, it goes beyond just selling the promises. I've actually been responsible for making the promises a reality. right? Working with our customers. I personally, this is how I was so successful in my career, was doing just that, doing just what you explained, Angela, was making myself an invaluable part of the sales process. But, from a systems perspective, I think, some ideas that I've used and would love to hear if you've employed these types of things yourself, whether it's HubSpot or it's Salesforce or whatever tool you use, is having a set of fields of information that you absolutely require your sales team to capture and pass it along before that deal gets set to close one. Right. That's definitely a way to get them to at least give you some information that you need, or require that every handoff includes a 15-minute handoff from sales to customer success. And in some cases I used, I captured information beyond just the product level stuff, but, the personalities that we're dealing with. Hey, this executive sponsor, real easygoing, but this stakeholder, total, passive aggressive. So you should know that going into it. So have you employed those tools, before, or are you using those types of tools now in your current roles?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
I think everything we've spoken about is leading up to that now moment of, where is that information kept? Is it in Salesforce? Is it a Google Doc? For me currently, we have a section of Salesforce with the information for sales to CS, and then we do at least a 30-minute live in person to go over that information. So if you're checking off all the boxes on a lot of the areas that we talked about earlier, then it should be a seamless transition to when you actually meet with the AE, and it's not just an obligation for them, right? It's not just a box to check.
Right.
It's really an opportunity to share relevant information and anything, allow them to add any color outside of what you're seeing in Salesforce or your Google Doc.
Or HubSpot.
Or HubSpot.
Remember, HubSpot's on the call, dude. You're not helping HubSpot.
My bad.
I'm just kidding. I love HubSpot. We're a HubSpot user. So
I mean, just to build off what Michael said there, right? Like the actual tactic stuff, we have to know who the team members are involved, right? Like who's our ultimate decision maker, who are we working with on a day-to-day basis, who's going to oversee the technical aspect of it, all that kind of stuff. Realistically, what are they actually trying to achieve, right? A tool like HubSpot, you can take it in tons of different directions. What do you actually want to get out of these next couple of months, these next couple of years, and how are we actually going to get there? What's our plan look like? Goals and teams are really the foundation to nailing that sales to CS kickoff.
We have joint execution plans that our sellers generally use. So that is something that I found useful in a couple different ways. One, if you're looking through that, then that helps guide your conversation. Now you can ask your AE some poignant questions, just get on the phone for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it may be. And it's not a, tell me about the account. It's an, okay, I did my research.
Right.
And that's where you're showing value, because now you're coming to the table and you're saying, I understand where the journey that got you to this place. This is what I'm confused about. This is what I need your help with. And this is what I think we can do. And now, boom, now you're into that strategic conversation. You've provided value. You've understood the account. You've provided value to your AE. And now you can start to have that strategic conversation, because depending on whether your AE is compensated on renewals or not, or if they're already they wanted to land this small deal so that they can continue to expand the account, they're not going anywhere, and neither are we. So I think that's a perfect way, if they have a joint execution plan, or whether it's a formal one or whatever it may be, I think that's a really good starting point. Review that, get some questions together, and get some ideas together also.
I think you nailed it there with just showing up, having done your homework, right? And minimizing the amount of time you have to spend. Your sales rep doesn't want to spend an hour on the phone doing a handoff with you. They've got to go hunt, and we want them to go hunt. So do your homework, show up. You don't have to go through every single thing. Show up with the specific questions. You nailed it, Angela. You're respecting their time, and you're showing that you've already made an effort to understand what's going on with the customer. So with that, let's talk about some, let's answer some questions. Right? I think we have some good questions that popped up in Q&A. By the way, once again, do a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen there. If you have a question, or if you want to upvote one, please check out the questions that have already been posted up there and upvote things that that are similar to what you have to ask. So Katie, thank you, Katie, for the question. Asks, have you formalized the sales to CS handoff processes in your companies? If so, how did you roll those initiatives out, and how was it received within the sales organization?
We have not formalized it. I have not yet worked for an organization that formalized it.
I have done it. I've worked with a bunch of customers that have done it. It was well received because the way we did it is we engaged with sales and had sales. It wasn't us creating it for them. We came to the table with something and we worked through it, and we got agreement from both, everything from the individual contributors up to the senior executives, and said, this is our go-to-market strategy for the sales to post-sales handoff.
And I think if you can piggyback off of something that they have to do during the sales process for their documentation and just see what you can extract from that you can then work off of, I think that is more well received, because nobody wants to duplicate effort. Nobody wants to do extra work. So if you can do that, and then we can piggyback off of that as customer success with a joint success plan, because hopefully that's all kind of laid out in, why did they buy, what their goals are, what they're looking to accomplish, what their timeline is, et cetera.
Yeah, we have a pretty formal process, and it's all about aligning around what the sales team needs to gather during their process and what CS needs to be successful when we take over, right? And those things are typically the same, right? As you're going through a sales process, you need to understand what are your goals, who are the team members, what are the objectives that you're trying to do, and that information kind of transitions nicely over to the CS team, right? I think Michael talked about having, fields and in Salesforce, we have properties in Hubspot that we'll use to track that information over time to make sure that we know exactly what folks are looking for, right? So a lot of it's about formalizing those things in your sales process that CS is going to need, and building that process out from there.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for me right now, we don't have a quote unquote formal process. And I think that's more to do with the size of the organization.
Pretty early stage, right?
Yeah, we just raised a Series C, but as we scale and grow, it's going to be important to formalize that process. And right now, my bandwidth, to be able to support 3 enterprise reps in the States is, still pretty open. But as we start to bring on more customers and I get tied up more, it's just not going to be scalable. So I think there are moments where you can kind of educate reps, which is where I'm working right now, is working with reps to help them understand what we need from a customer success perspective. So having that kind of flexibility and being able to have those conversations and the relationship piece of what we kind of talked about earlier is where we're at as an organization.
Well, and I think that, it's not just, I've seen it, when you feel like the company is getting ready to really scale quickly, you need to have this process baked, because if you don't have this process baked and you begin to scale fast, you're going to have a lot of problems, and you're going to find yourself from a customer success perspective kind of behind the ball. You're going to be in incredibly reactive mode, and that is not a good place to be in customer success for yourself or for your customer. But that kind of dovetails nicely actually into the next question. Thank you, Katie, by the way, for that question, and for the roughly half dozen people who voted it up. Ashley asks, how do you navigate conversations with AEs who are protective over their customer relationships and somewhat reluctant to share relevant information? Which is always, I've had this question asked me before, and it's an interesting question given that we're all trying to make the customer successful.
I think there's definitely more beneath that. It's really peeling back some layers to understand the why there. So I think, again, deploying a lot of the tactics that we spoke about earlier in terms of building a relationship and deploying empathy and breaking down those walls with AEs, because if you're at the point where they're going to be hesitant to share information with you, you're not in a good place. So I think starting early and often, trying to show initiative, deploy empathy, understand their motives, and what's important to them. I think even personally, like what they strive for within an organization. We get so caught up in maybe how you're compensated or what their outcomes are as a sales rep. Like what drives them personally? How can you kind of help build them up? I think that's important to avoid getting to a place where they're not going to share information with you.
And to Angela's point earlier, do your research, right? Come prepared with good questions to ask to get more information than what you might need to, right? Obviously, Michael's spot on. Ask the why. There's got to be something there. Peel back some layers, right? But if you're really worried about someone being protective, bring very pointed, thoughtful questions around, hey, I read this, I noticed that. What are your thoughts here, right? And try and add that value as fast as you can.
I would also make sure to engage the greater team. Is there a solutions engineer that has some information that you can leverage? Are you completely blocked from talking to the customer directly? Like has the deal closed and have you been introduced? Can you start reaching out to, it's a little bit passive aggressive. So, I mean, like if you're at your wit's end, I would go this route and just, start reaching out to people. And now you're bringing value and you have information. So now you guys can both share information together as opposed to you having to rely on that AE for information. Like I said, you have to find what works for you and find your style and your groove. Chat about it with your manager or some, maybe other CSMs on your team to kind of see if this is a problem that has always been the case with this AE and there's no changing this person. So then definitely you'll have to find a way to work around it. Or if, maybe this person has a really high quota this month or this quarter or this year, and they're just pedal to the metal. And that's why, to Mike and Michael's point, and that's the reason why. But get creative. We're CSMs. That's what we do.
I found that's great. You're right. That's what we need to be doing. It's part of our job description. I found more times than not, it was both as a consultant working with my clients as well as somebody in this role and managing these teams it was a matter of trust, right? There was a lack of trust between the sales, who worked, and this kind of dovetails also into Neonila's question about bringing the sales AE perspective to the conversation, especially in a scenario where customer relationship management post-sale resides entirely in CS. Now, depending on the extent of the sales process, your sales rep, your account executive went through a lot to get this customer, to this point where they've made a purchase. So, they need to feel confident. They need to trust that when they're handing this customer off, that you're not going to screw it up, right? And I think a lot of that trust though comes. It's not something you can't just say trust me, right? You've got to like you said earlier, right? You've got to demonstrate that. You got to show that you're competent. You got to demonstrate knowledge of the domain and make sure that you're communicating well with sales and that that they understand that you're focused on the customer success as well. And part of that begins with educating them before they've even sold to that customer.
And sometimes they don't have all the answers either. They might just not have the information. And it's not a bad thing, but I think in my experience, AEs are not always, I think humans in general, you're not always willing to admit that you just don't know. So some of that hesitation to be forthright may just be, it's not really clear to me. They don't want to look like they don't have the knowledge of the customer. So again, and I think that changes. People are more comfortable with being vulnerable with you once you build that rapport and you have that trust and all those things.
Yeah, that word trust is so important. Nobody sells a deal with hopes that it's going to churn 6 months from now, right? So you have to make sure you really have that trust down to actually grow the account together, right? It's not about just a one and done situation. We want to grow better together.
Right.
Well, and we talk about in customer success, establishing that trusted advisor relationship with our customers. We need to have that type of relationship with our sales team as well. Where we need them to trust us. We need them to look at us as a trusted advisor. And, Angela, I love that you brought up the sales engineer angle. I found that when I had a challenging account executive to work with, my next stop wasn't going to that guy's boss or that woman's boss, but going to the SE. And some of the strongest relationships that I and my team have established were with these sales engineers, because, you know, if anything, they're keeping things, you know, they're also really good at managing expectations, you know, as well as giving us a heads up. Hey, by the way, you know, this customer is going to expect X, Y, and Z. So you should know about that. So if you have that, and there's a challenging relationship there, definitely take the SE angle as well. So Ashley, thank you for the question. Neonilla, thank you for the question. Got another one here. Do you find a best practice is to have AEs matched with individuals on the CS team for relationship building, or can it work to just have a teams work together type of approach, kind of a round robin approach?
I think a lot of this goes back to how your company is actually structured and like what you're selling into, right?
Yeah.
If you have nice vertical alignment, that probably makes sense there, right? If you're more segmented on, let's say, industry or company size or something along those lines, this can be a little bit different. So I would say depending on how your organization is actually structured. But what I will say is that I think either one is a nice improvement from nothing. So if you don't have nothing in place at the moment, having some kind of team set up or a pod set up or individuals working together will be an improvement in that handoff. Either one can work really well depending on your work structure.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's all dependent on how your organization is structured, but I view it as kind of an opportunity. You know, I don't want to work with just one persona. I think working with multiple types of personas and different audiences just helps you become more of a well-rounded CSM and understand how to work with different type of people.
My only recommendation to add would be minimizing the number of AEs, the CSM, and vice versa. Because if you are, I've known people who were mapped to, I think, like 22 AEs. Mm. So how do you prioritize, right? How can you really identify, how can you really bring that value to your AEs, to your customer, if you have 22 different perspectives and priorities that you have to work towards? So if there's any way to minimize that, I personally right now, I think I work with 7 or 8 different AEs, and that's fairly manageable for me. So I can really have the discussions. I know which accounts are priorities for our region. Again, so there's a lot of discussion that has to happen, but for our region and then for each of them individually. And then I can very easily say to them to manage expectations, back to our earlier discussion, and say, that's great if this is our strategy at this account, but that means I'm not going to be able to execute on this other initiative at the other account we're working on. So do you want to take that on and I'll take this on, or vice versa?
Yeah, 22, owning 22 AEs.
Yeah, it did not work.
How can you be such strategic?
You can't.
Right? You can't. You're just a glorified support agent. You're in major reactive mode. Yeah. You know. And so yeah, that's tough. And thank you, Colleen, for that question. Actually, Megan posts, I'd be curious to know if there are any attendees that are both an account executive and customer success manager. I do all sales marketing for our existing customers, over 400. And then I'm also our CSM and don't have a team to support me. Wow. As a CSM, I'm responsible for onboarding my other 2 sales execs customers and follow up in addition to marketing to and taking care of our current customer pool. It's such a unique position. I'd be interested to hear any experience doing the same or advice. Yeah. That just seems like an unmanageable number of customers.
Yeah, kudos to you for like being here and like upright. Like
how do you have the time?
That's amazing. Yeah. I think I cut Michael off. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say a bad joke anyway. So
that's
yeah. I mean, I really
eyes went like, that's a tough one. Yeah.
I think really having to, unfortunately, because it's one of those things that you have to make the time to do. And right now, all of your time is just executing and doing, is really segmenting everything that you're doing and making it very clear on, and it doesn't have to be, you know, a huge undertaking just to get everything that you stated with us and taking all of those and just segmenting them. And having, you know, if I may, a box note for each one of those, each one of those responsibilities, and then outlining what's involved in each of those responsibilities. And I think, like, for me, the first thing in hearing that list is like, okay, so what crossover is there within those responsibilities? What are unique to each one of those responsibilities? And then how can I start to think about this in a different way that's more strategic? How can I start to segment? How can I start to offload perhaps
And
some
automate.
of it? And automate.
Yes, automate big time. Use something like a HubSpot, create a drip campaign, segment your customers. These are my no touch or my low touch, right? And hopefully you get half of those or 3/4 of those off your plate, right? And putting into some sort of automated routine. And then you're being more strategic with the larger ones or the ones that have more potential.
Yeah, I was going to say the same exact thing, Andrew. That seems like a big systems opportunity as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
A huge systems opportunity. I will say too, like being a CSM, and Angela called this out earlier too, is kind of ruthless prioritization, right? Like what directly ties back to the things that you're going to be judged on or judged against, right? So having that in the back of your mind to make decisions is going to be really, really important there. And you can't do everything in a day. So having some kind of system and clear prioritization is going to be really important there.
Yeah, and you just don't throw a system at it. I mean, you're going to have to try stuff and see what works. But once it seems like you got yourself into a rhythm and people are responsive, customers are responsive to certain things, systematize it. And even if it's that system could be, and I did this with, had this with one of my coaching clients. They said, we're having a hard time training our folks, and they were doing one-on-one coaching. I'm like, oh, do a webinar. And that completely changed the way they were delivering success. Instead of doing one-on-one trainings, they would have webinars. Now they have dozens of customers show up, and it made for a much more scalable operation, right? So always want to be thinking that way. How can I scale this? Even if it's a high touch, right? Even if it's traditionally high touch, how can I scale this in some way?
Right. And I was just going to add to that, Megan, I personally feel that a traditional CSM and a traditional AE role are competing. You can't really do both effectively with one human. So maybe there's something Andrew can do to help, and talk to your org or your boss or something to help through that. I know that these suggestions might not have been necessarily what you were hoping for out of this, but definitely one, what you're doing is amazing, and two, there's a better way for that. And you can't be an effective AE and CSM. You can be an AE, and then you're an account executive or an account manager, but you're definitely not a CSM. This is not directed to you personally, Megan. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Megan, for the question. All right, we got another question. We only got a few minutes left, so I want to try and get through as many of these as possible. Who ultimately owns the account relationship after sales, especially when sales is responsible for closing upsell opportunities?
It's funny. I think Angela used the same word on Friday that I use, which is that quarterback role, right? So ultimately, who owns the account and who serves as the quarterback behind the scenes, making sure everything's working is. The tough part with CS is, of course, so much this depends on how your org is currently structured, right? But ultimately, it feels like CS is going to own that customer, right? You're serving as the quarterback. You'll loop in the right person at the right time for what they need, and you're going to be that quarterback with the total customer experience.
Yeah, I think customer success, and we talked about this on Friday as well, customer success needs to create the environment for a renewal or an upsell. And then sales comes in, and we want them to handle the terms and conditions, close the deal, right? So to say, so that way we don't blow that trusted advisor relationship. Are you selling to me, or are you really here to ensure that I'm getting value out of your platform? And that means, to your point, Mike, that customer success should be owning that customer and owning to ensure that they're getting value.
Yeah, I think recently we went through an exercise of our leadership of just calling out roles and responsibilities. Who's going to own the executive business review? Who's owning implementation? Who's owning this and that? I think having clarity around that, but also keeping in the back of the mind of what you just described, Andrew, is our main objective is to drive value. And if we're checking the boxes on business outcomes that the customer is hoping to achieve and why they're investing in your solution, then it should be just an easy handoff for the AE to kind of chat about commercials.
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't matter really, I don't think, one way or the other, as long as the expectations are clear, the roles are clear. We actually at Box currently, the AEs are the quarterback. I don't know if I should say this on a recording, but you know, there's ways around that too. You still get to own, you know what I mean? Like you can still be part of that strategic conversation and leverage each other's strengths that way.
Idris asks, how about when your org has a separate billable consulting delivery function? So in effect, the team responsible for implementation. What are the best practices to ensure the handoff is seamless and cohesive between sales, delivery, and client success? This is how, you know, this is where I got my start in success. Before success was a thing, you know, there was a billable delivery consulting piece, and I think a lot of the same things we've already talked about today ring true. You know, making sure that there's a good understanding between sales and customer and post sales. Well, let's just call it post sales now. Between sales and post sales about what the customer is trying to achieve. Very clear communications. Getting even more important, I think, in that scenario, that post sales is getting involved at the end of the sales cycle. So we're setting appropriate expectations. We understand what the implementation entails, and we're setting that expectation with the customer. Anything else?
I've always been of the mindset, and you know, I work post-sale, post-implementation primarily, but I've always viewed implementation as it might be the most important part of the post-sale process. Those first couple of days in the tool that you've just purchased, learning your habits, building out your strengths, the things that you're doing from a previous system now into a new system, I think are just so important. To Andrew's point, not a whole lot changes there, right? The expectations have to be set the same way with a CS member. You have to have the same clear goals, the same clear team members, and the same clear timeline, right? So it shouldn't change a whole lot in terms of what we talked about, but definitely a really important part of the process.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be engaged. I've worked very closely with our consulting team. Other CSMs historically have not, and there is so much value in just being a fly on the wall. You know, if it's a change management engagement and being in those user persona interviews, oh my gosh, could you like imagine? That's the holy grail. That is everything that I need in order to help this customer be successful. So now you don't even have a handoff when you go from the implementation to, you know, then just the account management phase, for lack of a better term. You've been there the whole time, and maybe you're not leading the engagement, maybe you're not leading the discussions, but you're providing value. And always, consulting favorite phase, I feel like, is that's not within scope. So, and we can cover that, because it's consulting saying that's not in scope, and you're saying, but that is with exactly what I can help you with. So let's talk about that. So now you're just building those relationships within the account. So just stay engaged.
All right. Well, we're at the end of our hour, and as usual, we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, but we definitely appreciate all the questions, the engagement from the audience. I want to thank all of our guests for joining me today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time on Friday, getting prepped. One final note, great CSMs know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created this series, the CSM Mastermind, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So I hope that you all got something out of this discussion, and we'll see you at our next event on August 26th, when we'll discuss how CS professionals can help product teams understand customer needs. Please make sure to check out successcoaching.co to find out more and sign up. Have a great rest of your day and week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks everybody.